Story 1. Hello everyone. Today we meet again in our series of true ghost stories and supernatural encounters. In this episode, we will go through a range of emotions. From curiosity to fear. Let's begin. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, feeling as though someone, or something, was watching you? Have you ever heard noises in an empty house that sent shivers down your spine? Tonight, I bring you two chilling tales, woven into one eerie experience. These are not mere stories but accounts of the inexplicable, the terrifying, and the supernatural. Take a deep breath, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself for what lies ahead. It was an early Saturday morning when we first noticed something strange. Sophia was lying on the right side of the bed, while Rachel slept on a mattress on the left. Just beside her, the room was dimly lit by the soft morning sun filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows on the walls. Sophia's back was turned towards the closet door, while Rachel faced it directly. Everything was quiet, until a faint scratching noise came from the other side of the bedroom door. Rachel stirred, still half asleep, but the noise grew louder. It was rhythmic, deliberate, as if something was dragging its nails across the wooden surface. Irritated, she groaned. "Sophia, quit messing around," she mumbled, thinking her friend was playing a prank on her. But when she opened the door, nothing was there, and the air felt heavier, pressing against her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Rachel stumbled back into the room, her pulse racing. She glanced at Sophia, who was still deeply asleep. Shaken, she climbed onto Sophia's bed and shook her awake. "You won't believe what just happened," she whispered frantically. Sophia blinked sleepily, then laughed, brushing it off as Rachel's imagination. But even as she spoke, an unsettling feeling settled in the pit of her stomach. Just as they were trying to move past the strange incident, something else happened. Sophia suddenly sat up, her breath shallow, her wide eyes fixed on the hallway beyond the room. Rachel followed her gaze and listened. A creaking noise echoed through the house. Then, step, step, step. Someone, or something, was coming up the stairs. Each step was slow, deliberate, and impossibly loud in the silence of the morning. Sophia clutched Rachel's arm. The two girls held their breath, waiting. The footsteps reached the top of the staircase, and then, silence. The air in the room felt charged, like the calm before a storm. Then, the closet door handle began to rattle violently. Rachel's blood ran cold. She saw the door tremble as if something was trapped inside, struggling to break free. The door creaked open, inch by inch. Rachel screamed. In an instant, both girls bolted out of the room, racing down the stairs without looking back. They spent the next few minutes in the kitchen, gulping down cold water, their hearts still pounding. Rachel finally broke the silence. "We need to tell someone," she whispered, but Sophia shook her head. "Who would believe us?" Just then, a knock echoed through the house. Both girls froze. The knocking was soft at first, then insistent. Knock, knock, knock. It came from the front door. Cautiously, Rachel stepped toward the peephole. No one was there. Another knock, this time from the back door. A chilling realization hit them. Whatever was inside the house wasn't trying to get in. It was already there. This wasn't the first time Rachel had experienced something unnatural. Years ago, her grandmother had lived in this very house. Due to a surgery that had left one of her legs shorter than the other, she always wore a special orthopedic shoe. It gave her footsteps a distinct sound, A dragging shuffle followed by a heavy thud. Shuffle thump, shuffle thump. Rachel had grown up recognizing that sound. It was as familiar as the creak of the old wooden floors. One night, when Rachel had come home from university for the holidays, she was sleeping on the living room couch. The house was quiet, the only sound coming from the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then, shuffle thump, shuffle thump. Rachel's blood turned to ice. The sound was coming from the kitchen. The same rhythmic steps she had heard all her life. The exact sound her grandmother used to make. Except her grandmother had passed away a year before. Rachel barely dared to breathe. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying that it was just a dream. Then she heard another sound. The coffee machine turning on by itself. Her grandmother had always been a coffee addict. Every morning, without fail, she would brew herself a cup before doing anything else. Rachel lay still, paralyzed by fear, until morning light finally streamed through the windows. She never told her family what had happened that night. But deep down, she knew. Her grandmother had never truly left the house. There are things we can explain, shadows playing tricks on our eyes. The wind rattling windows, the groaning of an old house. But then, there are things that defy reason. Things that stay with us, even after death. Maybe Rachel's grandmother never truly left, bound to the place she had called home for so many years. Maybe the spirits of the house were simply making themselves known to Sophia and Rachel, curious about the new inhabitants. Or maybe, just maybe, some doors, once opened, can never be closed. So, the next time you hear footsteps in an empty house, or a knock when no one's at the door, take a moment to listen. Because you might not be as alone as you think. Thank you for listening. If you've ever experienced something similar, share your story with us. And as always, stay curious, stay safe, and be careful what doors you open. Story 2. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you weren't alone? Even when you were? Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night with an unshakable feeling that someone was watching you? I have, and I remember it like it happened just yesterday. This isn't a story that I made up, nor is it one that I borrowed from someone else. It's my own experience, a night that has stayed with me all these years. No matter how much time passes, I can still recall every detail with an eerie clarity. If you've ever doubted the existence of things beyond our understanding, maybe my story will make you think twice. I was only 7 years old when it happened. At that age, my biggest worries were school, playing outside, and making sure I didn't miss my favorite cartoons. The concept of ghosts, spirits, or anything beyond the normal world wasn't something I gave much thought to. That night, I went to bed as usual, tucked under my warm blanket, drifting into the carefree sleep of a child. But something woke me. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a nightmare. It was just a feeling. I remember lying there in the darkness, my mind still hazy from sleep. My small bedroom was cast in faint shadows from the nightlight on my desk, its glow barely enough to illuminate the corners of the room. Everything seemed normal, and yet, something felt wrong. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things, that I had just woken up in an odd state and needed to shake off the drowsiness. But the longer I lay there, the more I became aware of a presence. Something, or someone, was in the room with me. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't see movement. But I knew. Then, my eyes landed on it. Standing at the foot of my bed was a shadowy figure. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It was real, tall, unmoving, watching me in complete silence. I tried to turn away, to close my eyes, to will myself back to sleep. But my body refused to obey. I was paralyzed, locked in place, my breathing shallow, my limbs frozen. It felt as though an unseen force was keeping me there, forcing me to acknowledge the presence of this man. His outline was distinct, his clothes old-fashioned, like something from a different time. He didn't shimmer or fade like the ghosts in movies. He was there, solid, undeniable, and I knew, without a doubt, that he was not of this world. The fear I felt in that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. It was primal, an instinctive terror that told me something was terribly wrong. Seconds felt like hours. The figure remained still, unmoving, unblinking. I couldn't see his face, but I knew he was looking at me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't work. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, something changed. A thought entered my mind, clear, desperate, pleading, "Please go away." And then, he was gone. Not like he walked away. Not like he slowly faded into the shadows. He simply wasn't there anymore. One moment he was standing in my room, and the next, the space was empty. The instant he vanished, my body jerked as if released from an invisible grip. I gasped, finally able to move, my heart hammering in my chest. I sat up, scanning the room in panic, searching for any sign that he had been real. But there was nothing. No movement, no shadow, just the quiet hum of the night. And yet, I knew what I had seen. For years, I tried to make sense of that night. Maybe it was sleep paralysis. Maybe it was a waking dream. Maybe it was a combination of childhood imagination and a dark room playing tricks on me. But deep down, I know better. I wasn't alone that night. I had felt his presence, seen him standing there, and the experience was so vivid, so real, that no explanation could convince me otherwise. Years later, I confided in a friend about what had happened. I expected him to laugh it off, to tell me I had just been dreaming. But instead, his face turned pale. I saw him too. He whispered. That sent chills down my spine. He went on to describe an almost identical experience, waking up in the dead of night, unable to move, with a tall, shadowy figure watching him. Silent, unmoving, terrifying, and just like with me, when he willed it to leave, it vanished. Was it the same entity? Had it followed us both? Or was it something that existed beyond time and space, appearing to certain people for reasons we could never understand? I don't have the answers, and maybe I never will. But one thing is for certain. That night changed me. Even now, as an adult, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and wonder, what if he's still there? Watching, waiting. I share this story not to frighten you, but because it's real. There are things in this world we don't understand. Things that exist beyond the reach of science and reason. Maybe most people brush them off, convince themselves that they imagined it. But what if we didn't imagine it? What if these things are real? What if they do exist? And what if, even now, they are closer than we think? Watching, waiting. Story 3. Hello, dear listeners. Tonight, I have a chilling story to share with you. One that has haunted its witness for decades. This is not just a ghost story, it is an account of strange occurrences. unexplained events, and a lingering presence that refuses to be forgotten. What you are about to hear is based on real events, experienced firsthand by the storyteller. So, turn off the lights, sit back, and prepare yourself for a journey into the unknown. When I was a child growing up in the small town of Fair Hollow, there was a little grocery store where students would stop by for lunch. It was run by an old man named Mr. Hendricks. He had a weathered face, a hoarse voice, and closely cropped white hair. There was nothing particularly menacing about him, yet he gave me an odd sense of unease whenever our paths crossed. Mr. Hendricks and his wife lived near our neighborhood, right next to an old gas station where my father would frequently stop. Their house was one of the most well-kept homes in the area, sturdy, clean, and seemingly welcoming, but for some reason, I never saw anyone entering or leaving. At night, dim lights glowed from the windows, but the house remained eerily silent, as if it were merely an empty shell. One Thanksgiving morning, sometime in 1981, I witnessed something that would stay with me forever. My father and I were driving to the local market when we saw a terrible accident unfold right in front of us. A classmate of mine, whom I later worked with as an adult, had crashed into Mr. Hendricks' car. The collision was devastating. I can still remember the sound of crunching metal, the smell of burning rubber, and the sheer horror of seeing Mr. Hendricks lifeless behind the wheel. I was just a boy then, but something about that moment felt heavier than just a tragic accident. It felt predestined. Years passed. The Hendricks house was left empty, slowly falling into disrepair. As time went on, I grew up, got married, and had children. When my second child was born, I moved back to my hometown, close to my parents. One day, as I was driving past the old Hendricks house, I noticed an estate sale was taking place. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to stop by. My youngest daughter wanted a rocking chair, so we walked inside. The house had an eerie feel to it. Despite being well built, it was cold, lifeless. It was as if the walls held secrets they could not reveal. But even with that uneasy feeling in my gut, I made a decision that changed my life forever. I bought the house. From the moment we started renovating, odd things began happening. My father and I worked late into the night, fixing up the basement and repainting the rooms. One evening, while we were downstairs, we heard footsteps above us. Heavy, deliberate steps creaked across the wooden floor. I called out, thinking my wife or kids had come home early. Silence. I rushed upstairs. Nothing. The house was empty. From that night on, the disturbances increased. Cold drafts swept through rooms despite the summer heat. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision. And then, the most terrifying thing happened. Sam, our German shepherd, was a loyal companion. He never barked without reason. But one humid summer night, he became frantic. His growls echoed through the hallways. His hackles raised as if sensing something unseen. Then, a loud crash sounded from the master bedroom. I rushed in, only to find the bathroom door had slammed shut by itself. I tried to rationalize it, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Then, one winter evening, Sam and I were outside in the driveway after playing in the snow. I turned back toward my car and caught a reflection in the rearview mirror, Sam collapsing. I rushed to him, but it was too late. He was gone. As I held his lifeless body, my heart pounded. I turned my gaze toward the house. The basement window was wide open. even though I had locked it earlier that evening. Scratches lined the inside of the window frame, as if something, or someone, had been trying to get in. After Sam's passing, the activity in the house ceased for a while. I thought maybe whatever force had been present was gone. But I was wrong. One evening in March, as we were preparing for church, I opened the laundry room door leading to the garage. The door jerked violently, as if someone on the other side was holding it shut. I pushed harder. Bam! The door slammed shut in my face. My wife and children stood behind me, frozen in fear. It was the first time my family had witnessed the terror with their own eyes. The fear, the stress, it took a toll on my marriage. Eventually, my wife and I separated. I moved out, but my youngest daughter remained in the house. She later told me the disturbances never stopped. Clocks would reset themselves. Televisions would turn on at night. Objects moved on their own. One evening, a lamp shot across the room, shattering against the wall. After that, she refused to sleep downstairs ever again. Years later, I sold the house. It was purchased within days. To this day, I wonder, has the new owner experienced what I did? Have they heard the footsteps? Have they felt the chilling presence in the rooms? I've been tempted to return, to ask, but something inside me warns against it. Some doors are not meant to be reopened. I still don't know what haunted that house. But I know one thing for certain, it was real. And it still haunts me to this day. So, dear listeners, what do you think? Was it the spirit of Mr. Hendricks, lingering in the house he once called home? Or was it something even darker? Something tied to the land itself? If you've ever had a similar experience, let me know. And remember, sometimes, the past never truly leaves us. Story 4. Hello, dear listeners. Tonight, I have a story for you. A tale that is as chilling as it is unforgettable. This is not a work of fiction, nor is it an exaggerated urban legend. It is a true experience. A memory that still haunts the one who lived through it. Have you ever felt eyes on you in the darkness? A presence lurking just beyond the veil of reality? If you have, then you know the kind of fear that freezes your blood. The kind that makes you question what truly exists beyond our world. Tonight, I bring you the story of a young girl, a window, and a pair of glowing red eyes that watched her in the dead of night. The kind of encounter that stays with you long after the night has passed. My name is Melissa, and I am now 13 years old. I have only had one supernatural experience in my life, but that one encounter was enough to make me believe that there are things lurking in the shadows. Things that we are not meant to see. I was 6 years old when it happened. It was a night in November. Just like any other, the air was crisp, the world outside my window silent. My parents had tucked me into bed at exactly 8 p.m. But as usual, I stayed awake for another hour. It had become a ritual of mine, staring out my bedroom window as my eyelids grew heavy with sleep. I was always afraid of the dark. I never felt safe unless I was completely buried under my blanket, leaving only a small opening to breathe. That night, however, I felt braver than usual. I pulled the blanket down from my face and turned my gaze toward the window. That's when I saw them. Two enormous, blood-red eyes staring straight at me. A paralyzing chill ran down my spine. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. My entire body locked up, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The eyes were impossibly large, glowing with a deep crimson hue that pulsed ever so slightly. They were not the eyes of an animal, not a cat, not an owl. These were something else entirely. For what felt like an eternity, we stared at each other. Or rather, it stared at me. There was no face, no body, nothing but the piercing eyes that bore into my soul. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished. I gasped for air, my body finally able to move again. Without thinking, I yanked the blanket over my head and curled into a ball. Trembling with terror, I did not sleep that night. I remained in my cocoon of safety, waiting for the sunrise to save me. But the fear did not leave me when morning came. It clung to me like a shadow, whispering in the back of my mind. I found myself avoiding that window, even in daylight, and though I tried to convince myself that it had been nothing more than a bad dream, a figment of a child's overactive imagination. Deep down, I knew better. Years passed, and though the memory of that night never faded, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare, a trick of my young imagination. That was until 4 years later, when I was 10 years old. It was an ordinary afternoon in the kitchen. My babysitter at the time, an older woman who had been with our family for years, sat across from me, sipping her tea. For some reason, I decided to ask her a question. "Have you ever seen anything strange in this house?" I asked, half expecting her to laugh it off. Instead, her face turned pale. Her hands shook as she placed her teacup down, and to my shock, tears welled in her eyes. "I don't want to talk about it," she whispered. I leaned in, my heart hammering in my chest. "Please," I begged. "What did you see?" She hesitated for a long moment before murmuring, "I don't want him to come back." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "Who?" I pressed. She slowly lifted her trembling hand and pointed to the window. The very same window where I had seen the red eyes staring at me years ago. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just me. Someone else had seen it too. From that day on, I never looked out of my window at night again. I kept my curtains drawn, my blankets pulled high over my head. I never spoke about the red eyes again, and neither did my babysitter. But that didn't stop the nightmares. Sometimes, even now, I wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, a suffocating fear pressing down on my chest. And in the darkness, I swear I can feel it, watching, waiting, just beyond the thin veil of my curtain, just outside my window. Once, in a moment of foolish bravery, I nearly pulled the curtain back. My fingers trembled on the fabric. My breath caught in my throat. But something inside me, some deep, primal instinct, screamed at me to stop. And I listened. Because what if it was still there? Some say children are more sensitive to the supernatural, that they can see things adults cannot. But what happens when those children grow up? Yet the memories remain as vivid as the night they occurred? Was it a trick of the mind? Or did Melissa truly see something beyond human comprehension? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: sometimes it is better not to look out the window at night, because you never know what might be looking back at you. Sweet dreams, if you can sleep after this. Story 5. Hey everyone. Welcome back. Tonight, I have a chilling story to share with you. This one isn't about a dramatic exorcism or a terrifying poltergeist attack. Instead, it's about a slow, creeping dread that built up over time, an experience that left two young women questioning their reality. We often associate hauntings with grand mansions or old, abandoned houses, But what if I told you that even the most ordinary apartment could become a place of horror? That's exactly what happened to our storyteller. And let me tell you, it's a tale that'll make you think twice before signing your next lease. It all started when two best friends, Lucy and Rachel, moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex. The place was nothing fancy, but it was affordable and close to their university. Everything seemed normal at first, but within a few weeks, strange things started happening. The first incident was subtle. Lucy's computer would randomly shut off, not just the screen, but the entire system, along with the speakers, the printer, and everything plugged into the same outlet. At first, she assumed it was just a faulty power strip, but after replacing it, the problem continued. What made it even weirder was that nothing else in the apartment seemed to be affected. The clocks stayed on. The TV worked fine. Only her computer setup would power down, almost as if something was deliberately messing with it. And then there was the feeling. From the moment they moved in, both girls felt an unexplainable tension in the apartment. It wasn't enough to make them panic, but it was there, a heavy, uneasy presence that neither of them could shake. Maybe it's just because we're in a new place, Rachel had reasoned, but deep down, they both knew something was off. Weeks went by, and the disturbances became harder to ignore. One evening, Lucy was home alone when she heard a loud bang coming from her bedroom. She rushed in and found the door shut. She knew she had left it open. Thinking it might be the wind, she and Rachel experimented. They turned off the fans, shut the windows, and even disabled the air vents. But still, the door would slam randomly throughout the day and night. One night, Lucy was about to take a bath. She filled the tub and went back to her room to grab her robe. As she turned to head back to the bathroom, slam! The door shut violently right in front of her. That was the first time she felt real fear. She didn't take a bath that night. The door slamming continued for weeks. And it wasn't just her room. The closet doors would also creak open slightly and then shut abruptly. Sometimes, Rachel would wake up in the middle of the night and find her own bedroom door open, when she was sure she had locked it. One night, they tried setting up their phones to record, hoping to catch something on video. They placed a phone on the kitchen counter, recording the hallway and the bedroom doors. The next morning, they nervously checked the footage, and there it was. At around 3 a.m., the bedroom door to Lucy's room slowly creaked open. There was no wind, no visible force, just the door moving on its own. Then, seconds later, it slammed shut with terrifying force. They replayed the footage over and over, trying to find a rational explanation. But there wasn't one. As if the bedroom wasn't enough, the disturbances soon spread to the kitchen. One night, the girls were watching TV when Lucy heard the sound of running water. At first, she ignored it, thinking it came from a neighbor's unit. But the sound got louder. She got up and walked to the kitchen. The faucet was on, water pouring out at full force. Rachel swore she hadn't touched it, and Lucy knew for a fact that she hadn't either. They turned it off, exchanged uneasy glances, and tried to brush it off. Then the dishes started disappearing. One evening, Rachel opened the kitchen cabinet to grab a glass, only to find the entire shelf empty. "Where the hell are all our glasses?" she asked. Confused, Lucy, equally puzzled, checked the dishwasher and sink. Nothing. They were gone. Creeped out but not wanting to panic, they left for the night, hoping that maybe they had just misplaced them. But when they came back, Lucy opened her bedroom door. The missing glasses were scattered across her floor. And then, they heard something. A whisper. It was faint, almost like a breath against the walls. Neither of them could make out the words. But it was there, and it was real. Even Rachel, the more skeptical of the two, could no longer deny that their apartment was haunted. For weeks, they tried to live with it, but the tension grew worse. Doors slammed harder. Shadows moved in their peripheral vision. Sleep became impossible. And then, one night, while lying in bed, Lucy swore she heard a whisper. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It wasn't coming from Rachel's room. It was right next to her ear. Leave. That was it. A few weeks later, they both found reasons to move. Rachel got a new job across town. And Lucy transferred to a different school. They packed their things and left without looking back. But to this day, they still wonder who, or what, was in that apartment with them. This story, like many others, doesn't have a clear-cut ending. There was no ghostly apparition screaming in the night, no levitating furniture, no dramatic exorcism, and yet, it's exactly this kind of story that gets under your skin. Some hauntings aren't about what you see. They're about what you feel. So, what do you think? Was it a restless spirit? A malevolent presence? Or just an overactive imagination? Let me know your thoughts. And as always, sleep well, if you can. Story 6. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another chilling tale that will make you question the boundaries between the living and the dead. Have you ever moved into a house and felt like you weren't alone? Maybe you dismissed it as just your imagination, a trick of the mind. But what if it wasn't? What if the house itself held a presence, one that never truly left? That's exactly what happened to me when I moved into Willowbrook House. At first, it was just an old house. Nothing special. But soon, I realized I was not the only one living there. Something, or someone, was still lingering, watching, and waiting. My family and I moved into the house on a warm spring afternoon. The air smelled fresh, and the birds chirped in the distance. It seemed like a peaceful place. The kind of neighborhood where people wave at each other and mow their lawns every Sunday. But the house had been vacant for years. My mother mentioned casually that the previous owner, an elderly woman named Marie Whitmore, had passed away in her sleep. At first, I didn't think much of it. I wasn't the type to believe in ghosts or haunted houses. That changed soon enough. One night, I found myself struggling to sleep. My body felt restless, my mind alert for no reason. Finally, I got up to go to the bathroom. The house was silent except for the faint creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet. When I returned to my room, I felt it, a sudden, sharp chill in the air. It wasn't just a cool breeze, it was something unnatural. Concentrated in one spot, my eyes flicked to the corner near my closet. The air felt denser there, as if something unseen had taken up space. And then, I saw her. A shadowy figure stood just beside the closet, motionless. I could barely make out the details of her face, but I knew she was staring at me. My blood ran cold, my muscles locked in place. Then, as if breaking free from a trance, I turned and ran. I burst into my mother's room, panting, my heart thundering in my chest. I refused to sleep in my room that night. After that, things started happening more frequently. One afternoon, my friends and I were outside setting up a small lemonade stand. My younger sister ran into the house to grab more supplies. Feeling playful, I grabbed the garden hose and sprayed a little water onto the kitchen window, hoping to give her a scare when she returned. But when I looked up at the window, I saw her again. Marie Whitmore was staring at me from inside the house, her face filled with disapproval. Her expression was eerily stern, as if she were scolding me for misbehaving. And then, she lifted a single finger and wagged it back and forth. My entire body froze. The hose slipped from my hands, water spilling onto the ground. I couldn't breathe. My sister came outside moments later, confused as to why I was standing there, pale and shaking. That night, I barely slept, and then, I heard the whisper. It came from right next to my bed. Leave. It was soft, yet it sent chills down my spine. I turned on the light, my hands trembling, but my room was empty. Still, the air felt thick, oppressive. The next morning, I made a horrifying discovery. Marie Whitmore had died peacefully in her sleep, right in my bedroom. Determined to learn more, I began researching the house's history. Marie Whitmore had lived there for decades. The neighbors described her as a solitary woman, rarely leaving her home, always peering through the windows as if she were guarding something. One neighbor, an elderly man who had lived across the street for over 30 years, told me something that made my blood run cold. Marie never liked change, he said. She never wanted anyone touching her things, moving her furniture, even after she got too old to care for herself. She was always watching. Then my mother told me something else. Marie had a habit of standing by the windows, staring out at the world as if making sure everything was in order. Even after her passing, neighbors swore they had seen her silhouette in the window on quiet nights. Had I seen her spirit? Had she been the one watching me, making her presence known? And if so, why hadn't she moved on? To this day, I don't know if Marie's ghost meant harm or if she simply refused to let go of the only home she had ever known. Some spirits, it seems, linger in the places they once loved, bound by memories, by attachment, or by something far darker. If you ever move into an old house, listen closely, feel the air around you. Sometimes, the past refuses to stay buried. And if you ever hear a whisper in the night telling you to leave, maybe you should listen. Story 7. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, I have something truly eerie to share. This is not just another ghost story. It's a personal account of a chilling experience that changed my perspective on the supernatural forever. Have you ever felt a presence in your home? Something watching you from the corner of your eye? Have you ever heard your name whispered when no one was around? If you haven't, consider yourself lucky, because after what I've been through, I know that the things lurking in the shadows are very, very real. So sit back, turn off the lights, if you dare, and let me tell you the story of the time I lived with a ghost. Before I dive into the events, let me share my perspective on ghosts. I've been fascinated with the paranormal for as long as I can remember. My mother would tell me stories about encounters with spirits, and many members of my family have had similar experiences. I believe that some souls, for whatever reason, refuse to move on. Maybe they have unfinished business, or maybe they simply don't know how to leave. These spirits exist in a dimension parallel to ours, invisible to the naked eye, until the right conditions align. Some people, intentionally or not, are more receptive to these presences. Sometimes, when we least expect it, the veil lifts just enough for us to see what lies beyond. And sometimes, those things see us too. My first real experience with the supernatural happened when I was around 10 years old, in my childhood home. One evening, as I walked through the living room, I saw a man sitting on our couch. It wasn't my father or my brother. He had an old-fashioned suit, his face shadowed by the dim lighting. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that man. I had seen his picture in old family albums. He was my uncle, who had died in a tragic accident many years ago. I blinked, and in that instant, he was gone. Terrified, I ran upstairs and locked my door. I wanted to believe it was my imagination. But deep down, I knew what I saw was real. Then came the whispers. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I would hear my name being called. A soft, hushed voice, just loud enough to make me question my sanity. It sent shivers down my spine. My parents dismissed it as a dream. But I knew better. Years later, I moved into a new house. I thought I had left the hauntings behind. I was wrong. One night, I was lying in bed watching TV when I felt the mattress shift. It was subtle at first, like someone had sat down beside me. But then, the bed dipped deeper, like someone was lying next to me. The worst part? I was completely alone. I turned, expecting to see nothing but an empty space. But the presence remained. The weight, the cold, invisible figure beside me. I could feel it breathing. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen, paralyzed with fear. Then, out of nowhere, my guitar, leaning against the wall on the far side of the room, let out a soft but distinct sound. A single, chilling note, as if someone had brushed against the strings. I stayed awake until dawn, refusing to close my eyes. Not long after, another terrifying event took place. One evening, I was sitting at my desk when I noticed movement near my bedroom door. A dark shape passed through the hallway, blocking the light from outside. I turned my head just in time to see a shadowy figure glide past the doorway. The moment I reached for the lamp, the bulb exploded with a sharp pop, plunging the room into darkness. My heart nearly stopped. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. But by then, the figure was gone. But I knew I wasn't alone. I wanted to believe I was imagining things. But then my father had his own experience. One day, he asked me a strange question. "Were you home yesterday at 3:30 p.m.? I shook my head. "No, I was at work." "Why?" He looked uneasy. "I was sitting in the living room, grading papers, when I heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy ones. I thought it was you or your brother. So I called out, but no one answered." The color drained from his face. I went upstairs, checked every room. No one was there. For the first time, my father admitted he believed something was in the house. And whatever it wasn't just haunting me, it was making itself known to the whole family. After everything I've experienced, I have no doubt that ghosts exist. Whether they are echoes of the past, lost souls, or something more sinister, I don't know. But I do know one thing. When you feel that chill on the back of your neck, when you hear an unexplained whisper in the dead of night, when you see something move out of the corner of your eye, you are not imagining it. They are real, and sometimes, they don't just pass through. Sometimes, they stay. If anything strange happens again, you can bet I'll be back with another story. Until then, sleep well. Or at least, try to. Story 8. Hey there, Fellow seekers of the unknown. Have you ever felt an invisible touch? Seen something move out of the corner of your eye? Or heard whispers in the dead of night when no one was around? If so, then you know the kind of fear that burrows deep into your bones. The kind that doesn't fade when the sun comes up. Today, I have a chilling story to share. One that comes straight from someone who lived through it. The names and locations have been altered. But the events? Oh, those remain terrifyingly real. So, settle in, dim the lights, and prepare yourself for an eerie journey into the unexplained. It all began when young Oliver was about 9 or 10 years old. He was lying in bed one evening, tucked under his blanket, hands nestled under his pillow. The night was silent, the only sound the rhythmic tick of the clock on his bedroom wall. Just as he was about to drift into sleep, he felt it, a gentle hand brushing over the top of his head. His eyes snapped open, heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, he lay frozen, unsure if he had imagined it. But the sensation had been real, as tangible as his own skin. A cold shiver ran down his spine as he bolted upright, screaming for his mother. Within seconds, the bedroom door flew open, and his mother, Eleanor, rushed in. "Oliver, what's wrong?" she asked. Worry etched across her face. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he stammered. "Something touched my head. It was like a hand." Eleanor hesitated for a moment, her expression unreadable, then forced a reassuring smile. "It was probably just a dream. Honey, you're safe. I'm right here." She tucked him in again, left the door open for comfort, and softly closed it as she exited. The warmth of her presence lingered for a moment, but fear still coiled in Oliver's stomach. He whispered into the dark, "Go away." When morning arrived, the terror of the night still clung to him, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He rolled out of bed and walked to the door, only to find it firmly shut. He reached for the doorknob, expecting it to turn easily, but it wouldn't budge. Panic flared in his chest. He tried again, twisting the knob with all his strength. Nothing. He took a deep breath, planted both feet firmly on the ground, and yanked with all his might. With a sudden force, the door swung open, nearly sending him tumbling backward. His mother was in the kitchen, making breakfast. Still shaken, he hesitantly asked, "Mom, did you close my door last night?" She looked up, puzzled. "No, sweetheart. I left it open, just like you wanted." The air grew heavy between them, unspoken questions hanging in the silence. Oliver swallowed hard. He knew, in his gut, that something else had shut that door. As if the incident in his bedroom wasn't enough, things only got worse from there. One night, Oliver decided to sleep on the couch in the living room. Maybe it was the sense of openness. Or maybe he just wanted to be closer to his mother, who often worked late on her computer nearby. As he lay curled under a blanket, he turned to face the hallway, staring into the darkness. And then he saw them. Two dark, amorphous shapes glided silently from his bedroom down the hall toward his mother's room. Their forms were hazy, like thick shadows detached from the walls. The sight of them sent a primal terror through him. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His small body trembled as he watched them disappear into the darkness beyond. A strangled sob escaped his lips. Eleanor, hearing his distress, rushed to his side. "Oliver, what's wrong?" she asked, kneeling beside him. With wide, tear-filled eyes, he pointed toward the hallway. "Mom, something just floated from my room into yours. Two of them. I saw them." She hesitated again, just like before. Then, in a soft, measured tone, she said, "It was nothing, sweetheart, just your imagination." But Oliver knew better, and deep down, he suspected she did, too. As Oliver grew older, the strange occurrences continued. But the most unsettling part? The voices. It started in the bathroom. Whenever he was alone in there, he would hear whispers, soft, indistinct, but unmistakably real. Sometimes, they murmured his cousin's name, Thomas. Other times, they greeted him, as if they knew he was there. "Hey, what's up?" His hands would turn clammy. His breath would quicken. Yet, no matter how fast he spun around or checked the empty corners, no one was ever there. And then came the footsteps. At night, when everything was still, he would hear them, light, deliberate steps on the roof above his room. Sometimes, they were in the hallway outside his door. And on the worst nights, they seemed to be inside his room, pacing just beyond the veil of darkness. He wanted to believe it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But when his mother admitted, in a hushed, almost fearful tone, that she had heard them too, he knew this was no trick of the mind. One of the last encounters Oliver had in that house was also the most terrifying. It was a crisp autumn evening. He was outside, shooting hoops in the driveway, the trees around his house forming dark silhouettes against the fading sky. He dribbled, took a shot, and missed. The ball hit the base of the hoop, bounced, and rolled down the hill toward the woods. Muttering under his breath, he jogged after it. As he bent to pick it up, something made him freeze. A shadow, tall, unnaturally still, stood among the trees, leaning against a trunk. It had no distinct features, no eyes, no mouth, just a dark form against the fading light. But what sent icy dread through Oliver's veins was the object resting atop its head. A headdress. His breath caught in his throat. He grabbed the ball and bolted back to the house. The next day, he told his neighbor what he had seen. The man listened, then nodded gravely. A long time ago, the natives used to walk these woods, he said, and deep in there, a house burned down. The couple inside never made it out. So, what do you think? Was Oliver experiencing an overactive imagination? Or was his childhood home truly haunted? The voices, the shadows, the unseen hands, they all point to something far beyond mere coincidence. Perhaps the house had absorbed the energy of those who lived and died within its walls. Or maybe, just maybe, some spirits refuse to move on. Whatever the case, one thing is certain. There are things in this world that defy explanation. And some houses never truly let go of their past. Story 9. There are stories that linger in our minds, creeping into our thoughts at the most unexpected moments. Some tales are born from our fears, our imaginations running wild in the dark. But others are real. Experiences that defy logic and remain etched in our memories forever. Tonight, I have one such story to share with you. This is a first-hand account of an encounter that has haunted me for years. I don't expect you to believe me outright, but I ask that you listen with an open mind. Perhaps, by the end, you'll understand why I have never been able to forget what happened in that old house. It all began 2 years ago when I moved into my grandmother's house. The house itself was over 100 years old, a sprawling structure with long hallways and creaky wooden floors that whispered under every step. From the moment I arrived, there was an uneasiness in the air. an invisible weight pressing down on me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. The eerie ambiance of an aged house playing tricks on me. But the feeling never left. One evening, after an exhausting day, I decided to take a shower before bed. The warm water cascaded over me, providing a fleeting moment of comfort. But then, as I glanced at the bathroom door, my blood ran cold. There, just beyond the frosted glass, stood a dark silhouette. The figure was small, unmistakably that of a young girl. But something was terribly wrong. She wasn't standing on the floor. She hovered, suspended about a foot above the ground. My breath caught in my throat. My heart pounded as the figure glided forward, passing effortlessly through the closed door. It moved toward the shower curtain, its shadow stretching across the dimly lit bathroom. Then, just like that, it vanished. Panic surged through me. I shut off the water hastily, barely rinsing the shampoo from my hair, and bolted out of the bathroom, wrapped in nothing but a towel. My grandmother and mother were in the living room, and the terror in my expression must have been obvious. When I stammered out what I had seen, my grandmother's face darkened slightly, but she said nothing. My mother, on the other hand, attempted to calm me down, though her laughter carried a nervous edge. That night, sleep evaded me. The shadows in my room seemed darker, and every creak in the old house made me jump. Then, around 3 a.m., I heard something. A faint giggle. I froze in my bed, my breath shallow. The sound had come from the hallway, just outside my door. Slowly, the doorknob turned, creaking as it twisted. The door didn't open, but I could hear it, breathing. Ragged, shallow breathing right outside my room. The next morning, I found my door slightly ajar, though I was certain I had closed it before going to bed. The next night, I was sitting alone in the dining room, absent-mindedly stirring a cup of tea while trying to shake off the events of the previous night. The large sliding glass door across from me reflected my image, and for a moment, I found comfort in the familiarity of my own face staring back at me. Then I saw him. A dark figure, a man, moved behind me. His form was distinct, his presence undeniable, but when I turned around, there was no one there. My body locked up in fear. I could still see him in the reflection, standing eerily still, watching me. Instinct took over. I jumped to my feet, my first thought being to run. But in my blind panic, I made a terrible mistake. I ran straight toward the figure. As I passed through the spot where he stood, an overwhelming coldness consumed me. It was more than just a chill, it was a void. A hollow, aching sensation that seeped into my bones. For a split second, my vision blurred, and in that brief moment, I felt something unimaginable. I felt sorrow, pain, and an unfathomable loneliness, emotions that did not belong to me. I stumbled forward, gasping for air, my limbs shaking uncontrollably. When I turned back, the figure was gone, but the terror wasn't over yet. That night, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not the usual creaks of an old house, but deliberate, heavy steps, pacing back and forth outside my door. I buried myself under the covers, too afraid to move. Then, the whispering began. It was faint at first, just a soft murmuring sound, but it grew louder, as though someone, or something, was standing right beside my bed. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering a prayer under my breath. The air grew colder, and then, just as suddenly as it began, the whispers stopped. The next morning, I told my mother everything. This time, She did not laugh. She told me that perhaps these spirits were trying to communicate, trying to reach out to me for a reason beyond my comprehension. She spoke in a hushed tone, her words carrying a weight I had never heard before. There was no mockery in her voice, only concern. Was she right? Were these restless souls trying to convey a message? Or was I merely the unfortunate witness to something beyond my understanding? To this day, I still don't know the answer. But one thing is certain. The memory of that house, of those figures, has never left me, and even now, on quiet nights, I sometimes feel that same icy presence lingering nearby, as though they are still watching, still waiting. Some experiences defy logic, forcing us to question everything we thought we knew about the world around us. Was this a case of a haunted house? A lingering spirit trapped between realms? Or something far more sinister? I leave that for you to decide. But if there's one thing I have learned, it's that sometimes, the past refuses to be forgotten. So, the next time you find yourself alone in a darkened house, and you catch movement out of the corner of your eye, look closely. Because sometimes, the dead are closer than you think. Story 10. There are moments in life when reality and the supernatural seem to blur, leaving us questioning everything we thought we knew. What I am about to tell you is not just another ghost story, it is something that happened to me. Something that left an imprint so deep that even now, I shudder at the memory. If you have ever felt an unseen presence in the dark, heard a noise that had no logical source, or even worse, been touched by something you could not see, then you might understand the terror I went through that night. It was late February, and the remnants of winter were slowly retreating. Patches of snow still clung to the ground, but the air carried a promise of spring. That night, I found myself alone in the house, an unusual occurrence that should have been a treat, except it turned into my worst nightmare. My younger sister was staying at a friend's house, and my little brother was spending the night at our cousin's. My parents, as usual, were asleep in their room. For the first time in a long while, I had the house to myself. I was watching reruns of an old sitcom in the basement living room when sleepiness crept over me. Deciding it was time for bed, I turned off the TV and climbed the stairs in darkness. As I stepped into my room and turned on the light, I suddenly felt a burst of energy, as though sleep had been an illusion. Shrugging it off, I decided to watch some more TV in my room. I locked the door, changed into my pajamas, and settled into bed. The night was peaceful at first. I checked my surroundings as a habit. The windows were locked. My closet was shut to prevent our cat from sneaking in. Finally convinced that everything was in order, I turned off the television and closed my eyes. Then it started. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate. Someone, or something, was making its way up the stairs. At first, I thought it was my mother or father getting up for some water. But then I realized something unsettling. There was no accompanying light from the hallway. The footsteps reached the top, paused, and then descended back down. A moment later, they started climbing again. This happened over and over. My heart pounded in my chest. I cleared my throat, hoping that if it was my parents, they would call out to me. Instead, I heard something terrifying. The sound of rapid footsteps sprinting up the stairs as if responding to my noise. And then, the doorknob rattled. I held my breath. Someone was trying to open my door. Not knocking, not calling my name, just twisting the handle aggressively. If it were my parents, They would have scolded me for locking the door. But there was only silence apart from the frenzied attempts to get in. Then, without warning, the rattling stopped. A few seconds later, I heard the unmistakable sound of my door unlocking. Panic surged through me. There was no key to my room. The knob didn't even have a keyhole. So how? Bam! The door swung open with force, slamming against the wall. My body froze in terror. I pulled the blanket over my head, willing myself to wake up from this nightmare. But this was no dream. I was wide awake, and I wasn't alone. Slow, measured footsteps entered my room. I felt an icy presence loom over me, standing right beside my bed. My breath came in shallow gasps. Then, it touched me. Two freezing hands pressed firmly against my back, the cold seeping through my skin, piercing straight to my bones. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before, an unbearable, unnatural chill. I lost control. Mom, Dad, Papa, help me, I screamed at the top of my lungs, my voice desperate, raw with terror. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it all reversed. The hands lifted. The presence stepped away. The door, which had been thrown open, now shut itself. The lock clicked into place. The footsteps retreated, descending the stairs, then climbing back up one last time before disappearing altogether. Silence. I lay in my bed, paralyzed, tears streaming down my face. The fear was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just the fact that something had entered my room, it was the knowledge that whatever it was, it had been aware of me, had interacted with me, and worst of all, it had the power to manipulate my surroundings. When I told my parents what had happened the next morning, they simply shook their heads. They had heard nothing, seen nothing, but I knew what I had experienced. It was real, and it left a mark on me that I would carry for the rest of my life. Some people say ghosts cannot harm you, that they are just echoes of the past. But what if they can do more than just haunt? What if they can reach out, touch you, and make you feel their presence in ways that defy logic and reason? I will never know what exactly happened that night, but I do know this: something was in that house with me, and it wanted me to know it was there. If you have ever experienced something similar, you are not alone. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes, the most terrifying ones happen when we least expect them.